The USB drive was sitting right on top of the recycling bin, half buried under a stack of old Christmas cards my daughter had swept off your mother's desk in one motion, like none of it mattered anymore. I almost didn't see it. It was one of those small ones, barely the size of my thumb, with a little maple leaf sticker on the side that had gone yellow at the edges. My wife had put that sticker there herself. I remembered the day she bought it. We were at the Staples on Carling Avenue, and she'd picked up a little sheet of stickers at the checkout the way she always did, peeling one off right there in the parking lot and pressing it onto the drive with her thumbnail. She'd laughed about it, said she needed to be able to find it fast. I stood in the doorway of her study and watched my daughter drop another armful of papers into the bin. "That USB," I said. She didn't even look up. "It's just old photos, Dad. Stuff from years ago. I already checked." "You checked." "I plugged it in at the kitchen table this morning while you were sleeping. It's nothing. Just pictures of the backyard from like 2011. She finally glanced over at me. "We don't need to keep everything." She said it gently. That was the thing about my daughter. She always said the hard things gently, as if the soft voice changed what the words actually meant. I didn't argue with her. I just waited until she carried a box of books out to the hallway, and then I walked over to the bin and took the USB out and put it in my coat pocket. I don't know why. I couldn't have told you in that moment. My wife had been gone for 6 days. I was still sleeping in 2-hour stretches and forgetting to eat lunch, and the house smelled different already, like the particular scent of her. That mix of lavender soap and old paperbacks was already starting to fade from the rooms. I wasn't thinking clearly about much of anything, but I put it in my pocket. Her name was Vivienne Ann Holloway, before she became Vivienne Martell. She was 63 years old when she died, and she had known for 14 months that she was going to. She never told me. I found that out later, much later. By the time I understood the full shape of what she had done, the patience of it, the terrible quiet love of it, I was sitting in a lawyer's office on Elgin Street with a box of documents on the table between us, and I had to excuse myself to go stand in the hallway for a few minutes because I couldn't hold my face together. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back. We'd been married 38 years. We had 2 children. Our son, who lives out in Kelowna now with his family and is largely absent from this story in the way that decent people sometimes are, and our daughter, Stephanie, who had moved back to Ottawa 4 years earlier after her second divorce, and who had inserted herself into our lives with a thoroughness that I had for a long time mistaken for love. She'd come back with almost nothing. A storage unit's worth of furniture, a lease that had fallen through, and a boyfriend named Ray who worked in real estate and had, in my opinion, the kind of confidence that has nothing underneath it. They didn't stay together long, but by the time Ray was gone, Stephanie had already made herself indispensable in a particular way. She handled things. That was how I thought of it at the time. She handled things. When Vivienne's mother needed to be moved to a memory care facility in Nepean, Stephanie handled the paperwork. When our furnace went and we needed emergency financing, Stephanie found the contractor and coordinated everything. When Vivienne started forgetting appointments, which I now understand was not ordinary forgetting, not at first, Stephanie started driving her to those appointments. And then, somewhere along the way, Stephanie started going into those appointments with her. I was working. I'd semi-retired from the engineering firm, but I was still consulting 2 days a week, and I was 64, and I trusted my daughter, and I trusted my wife, and I thought the arrangement was a kindness. I didn't know that Vivienne had been diagnosed with early-stage pancreatic cancer in October of the year before she died. I didn't know she'd had a second opinion and a third. I didn't know she'd been told that with aggressive treatment there was a reasonable chance of slowing the progression, or that she had chosen not to pursue that treatment. and I didn't know why she'd made that choice until I read it in her own handwriting. What I knew, what I was allowed to know, was that Vivienne seemed tired more often, that she'd scaled back her volunteering at the library, that sometimes she would sit in her chair in the evenings and look out the window at the backyard with an expression I could not name. I should have pushed harder. I know that now. But she was a private woman in the way that people from her generation sometimes are. She'd grown up in a house where you didn't discuss illness at the dinner table, and when I asked if she was all right, she'd say, "I'm fine, just tired." And I believed her because I wanted to believe her, because the alternative was something I wasn't ready for. Stephanie knew. Stephanie had known almost from the beginning. The first time I noticed that something was wrong with our finances was about 7 months before Vivienne died. I'd gone online to check our joint savings account. We'd had the same account at TD for over 20 years, and the balance was lower than I expected, significantly lower. We'd had just over $90,000 in there, money we'd been saving slowly over the years for a trip to Portugal that Vivienne had always wanted to take. The balance now read just under $31,000. I asked Vivienne about it that evening. She said she'd had some unexpected expenses, medical. She said she didn't want to worry me. She said she was handling it. I asked what kind of medical expenses weren't covered. She said it was complicated, that some of the specialists she'd seen were out of province, that there were alternative treatments she'd looked into. She was calm when she said it. She looked me in the eye, and I believed her because in 38 years my wife had never lied to me about anything that mattered. I know that sounds naive. I understand if you're thinking it right now, but there are people in your life you extend that kind of trust to, and Vivienne was mine. She did not tell me that 3 weeks earlier she had added Stephanie as a joint account holder on that savings account. She did not tell me that Stephanie had been making withdrawals in amounts just below the threshold that would trigger a bank notification. 2,000 here, 2,500 there. She did not tell me any of that because she didn't know. She'd signed the form in a TD branch while Stephanie was with her at an appointment, and the financial advisor there had presented it as a routine measure, something to make things easier in case of emergency. Vivienne had not understood what she was signing. Her oncologist would later confirm that cognitive effects are not uncommon in later stages of her condition. Stephanie understood exactly what she was signing. There are things I can explain logically, and things I still can't. I can explain now why Vivienne didn't tell me she was sick. She wrote it in the notebook. I'll get to the notebook, that she was afraid if I knew, I would make decisions out of grief rather than reason. She knew me. She knew I would have pushed for every treatment available, would have spent everything we had, would have turned our last months together into a medical project rather than a life. She wanted to protect me from that. And she wanted to protect herself from watching me fall apart before she was ready for me to fall apart. I can understand that. I hate it, but I can understand it. What I struggled with for a long time was this. If she was protecting me, why did she trust Stephanie? The answer, when I finally had it, was almost worse than the question. She didn't trust Stephanie. She was watching Stephanie, and she had been watching her for a long time. I plugged the USB into my laptop on a Tuesday afternoon, about a week after I'd taken it from the bin. My daughter's description had been accurate in one sense. There were photos on there, hundreds of them. The backyard in different seasons, the garden Vivienne had kept near the fence, birthday dinners and Christmas mornings going back 15 years. I sat there for a long time going through them, which I think is what she intended. I think she knew I would do exactly that, would sit there in the quiet and look at our life together, would soften before I found what else was there. Because buried inside a folder labeled Garden 2014, among 60 or 70 photos of the raised bed she'd put in that summer was a subfolder called R. Inside that folder were spreadsheets, Bank statements, screenshots of transactions from the joint savings account and from a line of credit I hadn't known existed. A scanned copy of the form Vivienne had signed, adding Stephanie to the account, with a note in Vivienne's handwriting attached. I did not understand what this was. I have since spoken to the branch manager. There was a Word document dated 14 months before her death, the same month she was diagnosed, that began, "If you are reading this, then I wasn't able to tell you in person. I need you to know that I tried to find another way. I need you to know that everything I did because I love you." And then there was the notebook. She hadn't put the actual notebook on the USB. It was a physical thing, a blue hardcover Hilroy that she'd kept in the locked drawer of her desk at the library where she volunteered. The document on the USB just told me where to find it. The key was taped to the underside of her bedside table, which I would never have found on my own, which I think was the point. Stephanie did not work at the library. Stephanie did not have access to that drawer. I drove to the Nepean branch that same afternoon and asked the head librarian, a woman named Sandy who had known Vivienne for 12 years, if I could retrieve something from my wife's desk. Sandy walked me back there herself and unlocked the staff room without asking any questions, which told me that Vivienne had spoken to her too. The notebook was there. I am not going to share everything Vivienne wrote in that notebook. Some of it is mine, some of it is for our son and for the grandchildren who will be old enough to read it someday. But I'll tell you what she documented, because documentation is the right word for what she did. She had kept records, dates, amounts, account numbers. She'd taken screenshots on her phone every time she noticed a discrepancy and had them printed at the Shoppers on Merivale. She'd written out, in her careful librarian's hand, a timeline of every suspicious transaction she could identify, going back 18 months before her death. She'd kept copies of documents she'd been asked to sign, with notes beside them explaining what she had or hadn't understood at the time. The total she'd calculated: money moved from our accounts through various means, money borrowed in our names and diverted, a GIC cashed out early without my knowledge, came to just over $140,000. She had also written a letter to a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, she'd done her research, the way Vivienne did everything. She'd found a family and estate litigation firm in Ottawa, had written to a specific partner there, a woman named Adesi Nwasu, whose name she'd found through the Law Society of Ontario Referral Service. She had explained the situation. She had asked Miss Nwosu to expect contact from me, and she had given Ms. Nwosu's name and the firm's address in the Word document on the USB. She had also set up an email. This is the part that undoes me still, when I think about it too directly. She had set up a separate email account through a provider I'd never heard of, and she had scheduled an email to send automatically on the first Monday following her death to the lawyer with a PDF of every document she'd collected attached. She'd figured out how to do this from a YouTube tutorial. She had a sticky note about it in the back of the notebook, sent automatically. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to do anything. She was 63 years old, and she was dying, and she was making sure that I wouldn't have to navigate the technical part of what she built. She knew me. She knew I would be lost in the grief and the logistics, and she removed one obstacle, just that one small thing. You don't need to do anything. I sat in the staff room at the Nepean Library and read that sticky note, and I could not speak for a while. Miss Nwosu had received the email. She had, in fact, been expecting my call. When I came into her office, a neat, bright room overlooking the canal, she was already familiar with the documents. She had reviewed everything Vivienne had sent. She had questions, and she asked them carefully, and I answered them, and at the end of our first meeting she told me that what Vivienne had built was, in her assessment, a very strong foundation for a case. Your wife was meticulous, she said. It was not a compliment exactly. It was something heavier than a compliment. She was protecting you. She should have told me, I said. Miss Nwasu was quiet for a moment. She probably thought she was sparing you something, and she may have been right. I've thought about that a lot since then. The case did not move quickly. These things don't. There were months of correspondence, disclosure requests, the particular bureaucratic rhythm of civil litigation that I had never encountered before and hope never to again. Miss Nwasu was patient with me and plain-spoken in a way I appreciated. She told me early on not to contact Stephanie, not to make any statements, not to do anything that might complicate the process. I did what she said. Stephanie called me several times in those months. She came by the house twice. The first time I told her I was not up for visitors, which was true. The second time I did not answer the door. I watched her through the window of the upstairs landing, standing on the front steps with a casserole dish, looking up at the house with an expression I couldn't read at that distance. I don't know what she told herself. I don't know what story she was living in, whether she believed she'd been helping, whether she had any genuine grief for her mother, or whether that too had been a performance. I have stopped trying to understand it. What I understand is what the record showed. What I understand is the sequence of events that Ms. Nwosu laid out in the statement of claim, documented, sourced, dated. What I understand is that my daughter looked at her mother's illness as an opportunity, and she moved carefully and patiently to take advantage of it. And if Vivienne had not been smarter and more prepared than any of us had reason to expect, she would have succeeded completely. The settlement was reached without going to trial, which Miss Nwasu had thought was likely once Stephanie's lawyer reviewed the full scope of Vivienne's documentation. The terms required Stephanie to repay the full amount, plus costs, plus interest, over a structured period. There were conditions. I'm not going to detail all of them. Our son flew in from Kelowna. We sat at the kitchen table the night after everything was signed, and I told him the whole story, from the USB in the recycling bin to the sticky note in the back of the notebook. He didn't say much for a long time. Then he said, "She did all that alone." "She did all that alone," I said. He put his head in his hands. We sat there together in the kitchen for a while without talking, and the house was very quiet, and I could hear the furnace running, and somewhere outside a snowplow was working its way down the street. I want to say something about the money, and then I want to say something about Vivienne. The money mattered. I won't pretend it didn't. $140,000 is not an abstraction when you're 67 and retired. It is the difference between certain choices and other choices, and its absence would have shaped the rest of my life in ways that I would have felt every day. I am glad to have it back. I don't feel guilty about that. But here is what I keep coming back to. Vivienne knew she was dying. She spent some portion of her remaining time, her remaining energy, which was limited and getting more limited, sitting at a desk in a library branch in Nepean, documenting transactions, learning how to schedule emails, writing instructions for a husband she would not be there to guide. She did this instead of spending that time on other things. She made that choice. I have asked myself what I would have done in her position. I don't know the answer. I think I would have told her. I think I would have needed to tell her. But I also know that Vivienne understood, better than I did, what telling me would have cost us both. She saw the whole board. She played the long game, and she won. She left me a letter, separate from the notebook, in an envelope in the locked drawer beside it. I won't share what was in it, except to say that the last line was, "The garden is yours now. Don't let it go." I have not let it go. Last spring, I put in a new raised bed along the south fence, the same place she had hers, and I planted the same things she planted: tomatoes, basil, a row of snap peas that she always said I ate too fast straight off the vine. My son came out in August with the kids, and we ate dinner in the backyard, And the light was doing that particular late summer thing it does in Ottawa, going gold and sideways through the trees, and one of my grandchildren asked me who had planted the garden. "Your grandmother," I said. Which was true. In every way that matters, it was her. I keep thinking about that maple leaf sticker, the one Vivienne pressed onto the USB in the Staples parking lot, laughing, saying she needed to find it fast. She put it there on purpose. She knew, even then, that it would need to be found. That's the part I come back to most. Not the courtroom, not the documents, not the number on the spreadsheet. That small yellow sticker, curled at the edges. She was already sick when she bought it. She already knew what was coming, and she was already thinking about how to protect me from it. That's who she was. That's the kind of person she had quietly chosen to be, over and over again for 38 years, without asking for anything in return. I've thought a lot about what made the difference in this story. Not luck, though I was lucky, deeply lucky, to have reached into that recycling bin at the right moment. But luck alone doesn't explain what Vivienne built. What she built came from something else entirely. She was honest, first, not just with me, but with herself. She looked at what was happening in her own family, with her own daughter, and she didn't flinch from it. That's harder than it sounds. It's easier to explain things away, to give the benefit of the doubt, to tell yourself a softer story. Vivienne didn't do that. She saw what was in front of her and she called it what it was, quietly and without drama, and she wrote it down. That kind of moral clarity, the willingness to see the truth even when the truth is someone you love, is not common. I don't think I had it in me, not to the same degree. I chose the comfortable version of events for a long time. She never did. She was also, and I mean this simply, brilliant. Not in a way that announced itself. She was a librarian. She spent her working life helping other people find information, and when she needed to, she turned that same skill on her own situation. She researched lawyers. She learned to schedule automated emails. She organized evidence the way she organized a reference section, methodically, usably, with whoever came after her in mind. She thought through every step, including the step where she was no longer there to explain it. That kind of careful, practical intelligence doesn't get celebrated the way other kinds do, but it saved us. It genuinely saved us. And she endured. She carried this for 14 months without telling me, which I still find almost impossible to fully absorb. She was sick and scared, and she was watching someone she'd raised take advantage of her, and she kept going. She did not give up on building the case. She did not give up on me. Some days I think that took more strength than anything I've ever done in my own life. I am not the hero of this story. I want to be clear about that. I picked up a USB drive. Vivienne did everything else. What I try to carry forward from all of it is this: the choices we make about who we are, whether to be honest when honesty is costly, whether to think carefully when it would be easier to react, whether to keep going when keeping going is exhausting. Those choices matter. They compound over time. They become the thing you leave behind. Vivienne left behind a garden and a locked drawer full of evidence and a sticky note that said, "You don't need to do anything." I'm still trying to deserve that.